Thank you, Dean. That was very kind. If I can remember how to use the technical devices will be great. What I want to do is talk, and I sort of want to use the slides as a background. I'm not going to read you the slides, but I'm going to talk about a lot of material around the slides. This is the guidance from my boss, Admiral McCraven. And I have heard him say publicly over and over and over again, there's no mission greater right now in the command than this one for him. This is it. The number one weapon system that SOCOM has is our people. Okay, there's no piece of equipment that we've ever bought, we've ever been issued that we can't replace. We cannot replace a single person. I would have left it up there longer if y'all were from state. But. Okay. So what we do in the CARE Coalition is we try to provide a model advocacy program. And if you think of 4 lines of operation that I have, it's recovery, rehabilitation, reintegration, and transition. Okay? The third one is our real goal. It's reintegration. And that's because you have made as taxpayers an immense investment in the talent that we have in our ranks. And our primary role when one of them get hurt is to get them back to duty. It's to get them back on that team. And I'll tell you, 99 times out of 100, that's their goal too. I had a young officer that I had known since he was a cadet at West Point. On his initial site survey in Iraq in 2007, and his vehicle was hit with an IED, and it killed everybody in the vehicle but him. He was sitting in the back seat. Did some significant damage to his face, and the very first words out of that young man's mouth when I met him at Walter Reed, when we got him over from Andrews, were, "Sir, this does not count against my team time." Okay? And what he meant was that this injury and the time he was going to spend in the hospital, he wanted credit for that time back to extend the time he was going to be on an operational element. Okay? That is typical of the people that we have in this community. The number of troops that I had deployed with prosthetics in the theater of war was absolutely amazing, because these people don't acknowledge these injuries as disabilities. So this is what we do: wounded, ill, injured, and our families. And one of the things that makes us a little bit different is that this is for the life of the troop and the family. Okay? We do not replace what the services do. I don't go in and try to replicate the great things that the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps do as part of their programs. That's my starting point. So we leverage everything they already do. There's absolutely no competition between us and the Wounded Warrior Brigade or any of the service programs. This is a combined relationship. This is a combined effort. This is collaboration. So this is our model. It's partnering with others. And it's about building that sense of confidence in our troops and in our families that if and when something happens, there's a network there. You don't have to know everything about the network, but the network will be there if and when something happens to you. And that sense of confidence is critical to the success of the units that we're in. Good. Bottom part there, by, with, and through. There's a lot of debate and a lot of discussion. What's government responsibility and what's private responsibility in this role. And it's really hard to draw a line and say this is a government responsibility, this is the individual's responsibility, this is the community's responsibility. I think that's really up for communities to decide for themselves. The government can't do everything. But communities, I think, more and more are recognizing that this doesn't have to be a burden on the community if we do this the right way. It's actually a tremendous opportunity for a lot of communities. It's a tremendous opportunity for the private sector. As the military gets ready to draw down 325,000 active duty troops over probably the next 5 years, this is an unprecedented opportunity for private enterprise, for private businesses to capitalize on some of the talent that has developed in the last 11 years. Talk more about that in a minute. So, as a troop, you're injured, you're heavily medicated, and you got to make a plan out of this. Okay? And that's daunting. It's daunting if you know what all these organizations already do, to figure out what order this works through. Let me see if okay, that's my focus right there. The casualty, then the family, then the unit, in that order. The family and the unit are a support mechanism for the troop. But that's my focus, and my job and the job of my staff is to think 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years down the road from where that patient and the family are right now, and to anticipate the decisions that they will need to make in order to weave this into a plan to create the best outcome for that troop and for his family. Understanding my primary role is to get that troop back on a team and back operational. Okay? It's not U.S. Special Operations Command that makes the decision that an individual is too badly injured to go back to a team. It's normally the service, or in some cases it's the spouse who says, you've had enough. And then we go into that final line of operation, which is transition. So my staff are experts in the benefits that all of these organizations and players in the game bring to the table. This is kind of a map of a geographic footprint. In addition to what you see here, I've got a team on the ground in Afghanistan and Bagram. I have a 5-man team at Landstuhl, Germany. So from the time someone is injured, we're in the game, we're in the pipeline. And I have a parallel communication system so that, and many times, my advocates back at Fort Bragg are talking to the unit commander, and they're giving the unit commander more up-to-date information than the unit on the ground may have, because my advocates are standing in the OR in Bagram or standing in the OR with an iPad in Landstuhl. So about anywhere we have a soft footprint, we have advocacy on the ground. In some cases, these advocates will have a 4 or 5 state area. So it's not just the active duty troops that we cover down on, it's our veterans as well. Now, when I say it's our veterans, we don't go in and try to take the place of the great things the VA does. We make sense of the VA's programs for somebody who's in a state of crisis. We help them build a plan with the resources that the VA has. And I have VA employees on my staff. So I have one of the 22 federal response coordinators sitting in my headquarters in Tampa, and I have someone from the Veterans Benefits Agency sitting down there. We probably have 3 to 5 Vietnam veterans a week will call in and they'll say, hey, 40 years ago when I retired, I was perfectly healthy, but I'm not so healthy anymore, and I think it's service connected. Okay, and so our staff starts that ball rolling, calls the right point of contact in the VA, gets the 2 of them talking on the phone, and then monitors the conversation and monitors the progress. So we're not circumventing the VA, we're not replicating what the VA does, we're leveraging what the VA does and getting it hooked up where there's need. I wish I could go through here, I wish we had time to go through here and talk to you about some of the talent that is represented by the names on this slide. I have the privilege on my staff of having 4 former brigade commanders and 19 former command sergeant majors, or senior enlisted equivalents. And that gives us a depth of knowledge and a level of judgment, maturity, and experience that's just immense. They can cut through the nonsense and the bureaucracy very quickly, right to the root of the problem, and are absolutely relentless until the problems get solved. Okay? Now, if we can't solve the problems through the bureaucratic processes that exist, and we find ourselves up against a brick wall of statutory authority, we'll go back and change the statutory authority. We have a legislative affairs branch in U.S. SOCOM. Admiral McCraven will make that the #1 issue as he visits Capitol Hill and makes that case known for legislation. And I'll give you an example. Last year, we were up against a wall with our transition opportunities. We had the ability through a program to do internships and apprenticeships in the federal sector. But those only translate into 3 to 5% into actual jobs for troops when they get out of the military. Great way to put some experience and some depth into somebody's resume. I'm looking for more than that. I'm looking for purpose and relevance in that individual's life when he takes his uniform off or when she takes her uniform off. Same reason they got up every day and put on a uniform, purpose and relevance. Okay, and that's what we're looking for to build in opportunities back in their lives when they get out of the military. I saw that existing more in the private sector than in the public sector. And quite frankly, with the problems that we have as a nation, hanging back on the shoulders of the federal government the responsibility to employ all wounded warriors, I thought was kind of ridiculous. So we went after legislation, got it approved, got it put into law at the end of last year that allows us now to go out into the private sector and build internships and apprenticeships with private companies while these young men and women are still on active duty. So for about 6 months at a time, I can take one of my troops and put them into Microsoft and have them work in Microsoft as an active duty service member, and Microsoft doesn't pay them anything. They're still drawing their pay and benefits. But what they're getting is they're getting experience and depth on their resume and a mechanism in a way they wouldn't otherwise. What they're also getting is they're building up credibility with that part of Microsoft or whatever company we've got them working in. When they come out of the military and they apply for a job, they're a known quantity there. And their resume will probably go to the head of the stack. And that's exactly what we're looking for. So these are things that we do. This internal top one is an internal program we've built within our acquisition directorate. We refer to it as O to A, or operator to acquirer. And that's where we take the Green Beret, the SEAL, the Ranger who's been injured, who's going through the recovery process. And we're taking that special operations background, the combat experience and leadership, in many cases the very high-end security clearance, and we're building into them the understanding and credentialing of how the Defense Department spends $500 billion a year to procure things. Because that combination of skills, when they get out of the military, is very highly in demand by anybody who wants to sell the Department of Defense things or services. So that's an internal program that we have the option to use. The mentorship piece is absolutely key. If you think of a triangle with that troop in the middle of the triangle, the 3 points of the triangle is the model that we're really trying to build. One point of that is a career focus after the military. And that's about developing a long-term conversation with the troop and the family on what do you want to do next. Another point of that is the education and credential requirements. And that's where entities like universities play such a critical role. The third part of that is mentorship. And mentorship involves former military, it involves other former government officials, it involves clergy, it involves educators, it involves people that came out, may have spent 20 or 30 years in the private sector in a career field that this individual is interested in. And when you surround the troop with those mechanisms, they have to try really hard to fail that plan. Because there's so many stopgaps in there. If they need a break, you take a step back. There are people surrounding them, okay? There are mechanisms surrounding them. And with the education piece, Congress has been very generous with the GI Bill. The VA is very generous with voc rehab. We still have a challenge state by state in getting credentialing for certain things, for skills that they've been doing at an expert level with people shooting at them in the military, and getting that credentialing done state by state. That's still a challenge that we have. But between the VA and DOD, we're approaching that state by state and making some good progress. So the purpose of these programs in many cases are to recycle these skills that we've paid so much to acquire, and in no way short of another 11 years in combat would we be able to replicate. And this is just kind of a line and block chart that lays out a description, the internal plan, the Operation Warfighter, which is with the other government agencies, and then the private sector opportunities. And some of those private sector opportunities aren't necessarily with companies. One of the best uses of that is to take a young man or woman who is from Chapel Hill. Great example. And I'll talk to the mayor of Chapel Hill and say, I've got a great deal for you. Let me give you someone who grew up in Chapel Hill, graduated from high school in Chapel Hill before they joined the Navy, and put them back in Chapel Hill for 6 months, still on active duty, drawing all their pay and benefits, in your office as your executive assistant. Everybody in Chapel Hill that's going to do anything has to come through the mayor's office. They get to meet everybody. Everybody gets to see them. They build that network. And at the end of that 6+ months of doing that internship, the medical board is finished in the military. They get out of the military. They might stay and work in the mayor's office, some other part of the city government, or chances are they got a lot of business cards in 6 months. They know how the mayor's office works, and that's a good skill that most enterprises in Chapel Hill would benefit from as well. Replicate that in every municipality in the country. And we have most of the wounded warriors put to work if we just did that. Okay? If we just opened that opportunity up. And we have the capability of doing that. And again, you're building up those mentors in the process of doing those types of activities. Okay. This is Brad Snyder. Brad grew up in St. Petersburg, Florida. Was a freshman at the Naval Academy in 2002, graduated in 2006. Brad was an explosive ordnance disposal officer assigned to SEAL Team 10. Last August, Brad was blinded by an IED in Afghanistan, responding to another IED that had gone off about 3 minutes before and had taken out 2 of his SEAL comrades. Okay. 1 year to the day from when Brad was blinded, which was 2 weeks ago tomorrow, Brad won his 3rd gold medal in London in the Paralympic swimming. This is an example of the talent that we have in this community. This is an example of the talent that exists in the military today. This is an example of that 325,000 that we're going to draw down over the next 3 to 5 years. And this is an example of the kind of talent that can be so beneficial to American enterprise. Brad is also an example of those private sector internships I'm talking about. I started a conversation with the CEO of a high-tech company that works with the intelligence community and law enforcement about how we would take somebody like Brad and integrate him in and maybe use him as the executive assistant to the CEO to give him that Cliff Notes MBA. Maybe give them a little bit of a focus of what they wanted to do when they got out of the military. And the CEO of this company and I had been having this conversation for about a month on and off, and I called him because I wanted him to be one of Brad's mentors. Now, the CEO is also a West Point graduate, so he understands the military. He spent 5 years as an intelligence officer. And I just thought he'd be a great mentor for Brad. And I said, here's his number. I need you to call him and just talk to him and see if you click, because as a mentor, you don't pick who you're going to mentor. It's the other way around. And that relationship and the connection really has to be real. I didn't hear back from him that night, so I gave him till the next afternoon and called him back, and I said, hey, did you ever get a hold of Brad? And he said, yeah, actually I did. We talked for 4.5 hours. It was too late to call you back. He's mine. Don't introduce him to anybody else. I said, what do you mean he's yours? He's actually mine. He's still on active duty. There's a limit to what we can do with him. What do you mean he's yours? He's mine. I know exactly what we're going to do with him. They put him in the center of a new initiative, spun 11 people off of the old company, stood a new company up around him. And that company is now doing algorithmic software development to go after trade-based money laundering. Okay, Brad can't see. Brad's not impressed by color PowerPoint charts or anything else. Brad's impressed by logic that moves from step A to step B to step C. And they were so impressed with Brad that they hired Brad's brother and moved him from Oklahoma City back to Baltimore to work with Brad. Okay, this is the kind of thing that's possible when you connect that senior executive and introduce them to this kind of talent. They see the talent for themselves. And they walk away with two very clear and distinct impressions in their head. One is, I want that kid on my team, even though I don't know exactly where I want him yet. And two is, I do not want him working for my competition. Okay? And that replicates itself over and over and over again. Go, Brad. This is another thing that we do. It's the Warrior Athletic Rehabilitation Program, or you'll hear us use the term WARP, because we love acronyms. And so WARP really consists of the 7 basic track and field events sanctioned by the U.S. Olympic Committee and the International Olympic Committee, and it's about creating an environment for wounded troops. But it's less about the athletic competition and more about the environment that stimulates mentorship between those wounded troops. So I have Brad Snyder. By the way, the very first thing I did with Brad when I met him in the hospital after I introduced myself, I dialed a phone number and handed him my phone and said, talk to this person on the other end of the phone. The person on the other end of the phone was Scott Smiley. Okay? Scott's a 2003 West Point graduate who was blinded by an IED in Mosul on the 6th of April of 2005. Scotty is the first active duty officer that any of the services kept on active duty because he said, you're not putting me out. Probably don't want me shooting a weapon anymore, but there are lots of other things I can do and I haven't fulfilled my service obligation. 6 years later, Scotty is still on active duty. Scotty went up to West Point, talked to a group of young cadets, and the superintendent up there was so impressed by the way those cadets responded, he said, I got to have you on my staff. I'm going to send you back to school to get an MBA. Okay, unfortunately, he went down the road here to Duke to get the MBA, but you know, Duke University has a culture to itself. And somebody coming in from the military doesn't necessarily enter into that culture quickly or assimilate into that culture quickly. Scott's class at the business school at Duke voted him to be the commencement speaker at his own graduation. That's how much he influenced them over the 2 years he was in that course. And he'll tell you it was a struggle. I mean, following along accounting principles when you can't see the blackboard is kind of tough. But he struggled through that. So Scott went back to West Point, taught leadership at West Point, was actually the commander of the Army's Northeastern Wounded Warrior Regiment that's actually based out of West Point. Went to the Infantry Officers Advanced Course, completely blind, graduated from there, and now he's on the ROTC staff at Gonzaga University in Spokane. So the very first person I wanted Brad to talk to was Scott. That's that peer-to-peer mentorship I'm talking about. And these athletic programs and these athletic events give us the ability to build an environment to connect those folks. We don't even necessarily have to know who they are. You build the event, you build the environment, the troops come, they start the conversation. I see a kid who's injured similar to the way I am. He was injured 5 years before I was. I see all the great things he's doing with his life, and all of a sudden things just start to click. And so the goal we want is for that double amputee to realize and to assimilate into his own image that those legs are nothing more than these shoes. I wore these shoes because I was going to be inside a building today. If I was going to be out walking around in the swamp duck hunting, I wouldn't have worn these shoes. Okay, a lot of these kids come out and they have 12 or 13 different prosthetics, depending on what they're going to do, and that's nothing more than an extension of the clothing or the hardware. Okay, but the prosthetic doesn't define them, the injury doesn't define them, and that's where we want them to be. That's what these athletic programs do for us. The other thing about our community is we're not satisfied with the 7 track and field events. So we go off and do what a lot of people call adventure races. And we incorporate our wounded warriors into those adventure races. One of them on the cold extreme is done in northern Minnesota in February. It's a 135-mile foot race across northern Minnesota, pulling an Akio, which is a sled. That doesn't sound like a lot of fun to me either. I know what y'all are thinking. The other one, which we're doing next month, is actually out in Hawaii. It's called the Molokai Race. It's about a 350-year-old tribal outrigger race between the Hawaiian Islands. And putting our wounded troops out there to show that they are not disabled, to show that they are able to do anything they put their minds to, sends a great message to the community. It reinforces psychologically with them that the only barriers they really have are the ones they set for themselves. And we're going to use every resource we have to push those barriers as far out as possible. There was a young sniper instructor at Quantico a couple of years ago who was walking around and he was teaching his squad the principles and the dynamics of picking a good reconnaissance position in different environments. And he was out in the middle of a field where there was not a whole lot of cover and concealment. And he sat down and the grass is about this tall. And he's explaining to these younger troops how you can really use anything around you to accomplish your mission of cover and concealment and overwatch and security. And one of the Marines asked him, well, what would you use around here to stabilize your weapon as a position? And he was already sitting on the ground, and he reached up and he pulled his leg off. And he set his leg up and he set the rifle on top of the leg, and he said, well, you can really use anything you want. And none of them realized he was an amputee. None of them realized he had ever been injured until he pulled that leg off. And he didn't pull it off to be a show-off. He was just showing them, you can use anything you have. But again, that's an example of how the injury did not define that young man. He refused to let it do that. Neither the injury nor the prosthetic. So when you see somebody like this, those prosthetics are just an extension of the boots because it looks kind of muddy. So these are some of the initiatives that we have working through the system. key piece down there is a tracking system that we use. It's our ability to reach in. Our commanders in any location can reach in and see in almost real time exactly where one of their patients is. We have about 5,600 people in our log that we track. Some of them don't need a whole lot of help. Some of them need more help than others. Some of them, their requirements will come and go. So that's what we do. One of the things that's important to understand about a convergence of events that are coming up in the next 12 months, the war drawing to an end in Afghanistan, most likely, troops coming home, the planned process of the drawdown, and we don't look at this as a disaster, we don't look at this as an emergency, it's just the planned process of the drawdown. And this is a cycle that the military goes through. But over the last 11 years, we have built up an immense amount of talent. This is not the Army of the end of World War II or Vietnam. At the end of World War II, 14.9% of Americans wore a military uniform. Today, it's 0.8%. And it hadn't been above that since 9/11. And it's getting ready to go down. 0.8%. Okay? The drawdown that's coming, and as these wounded warriors exit the military, this represents an immense opportunity for universities and the private sector to capitalize on this talent. Veterans of the last 11 years integrating into UNC's programs add depth, add experience, add an immense amount of knowledge to every discipline being pursued on this campus and on every other campus. And that's the way the university should approach them. Should aggressively be going after them for the talent, for the experience. The things that we've asked these young men and women to do in the last 11 years are nothing short of stunning. The results that we've produced in the last 11 years in Iraq and Afghanistan are not because of people at my level, or General Petraeus' level, or General Casey's level. It's a result of the sergeants and the lieutenants and the captains that are out on the ground doing the really, really hard work. In many cases, work we never taught them how to do. There's a great documentary called Restrepo that Sebastian Junger and Tim Hetherington made in 2007 when they went up into the Korengal Valley in Afghanistan and followed an infantry company from the 173rd around for 15 months with high-definition cameras. And there's a scene in that movie that every time I watch it, it just strikes me as that's the definition of this generation. And the company commander is sitting on the ground in a mud hut talking to about 25 Afghan tribal leaders. And our presence in the Korengal Valley wasn't to conquer the Korengal Valley. We were there protecting construction workers as they built a road into the Korengal so that the Afghan government could deliver services to that very isolated part of Afghanistan, geographically isolated. But at the time, it was the most violent place in Afghanistan to be. And actually, Dan, the company commander, is having a conversation with these tribal elders. They're trying to convince him that to release from detention someone from one of the local areas that Dan actually had on videotape cutting someone else's head off, and they're trying to convince him, oh, but he's a good guy. And here's this infantry captain sitting there trying to negotiate for the cooperation of these tribal elders. And what you're really looking at there is time travel. That is 2007 talking to the 3rd century. Okay, and I don't mean that in a condescending way at all. I mean, that culture doesn't reason the way we reason in the Western culture in 2007. And nobody at Fort Benning ever taught Dan how to do that. That is the creativity, the tenacity, the perseverance, the problem identification, and the problem-solving capability that this generation has in them naturally. And the way we've challenged them in the last 11 years has really brought those capabilities and skills to the surface. That's the opportunity that the private sector in this country now has, that universities in this country now have, to grab this talent and to focus this talent in the direction that they individually want to go and that we need to go as a country. So we're going to talk to a couple of organizations, one community-based, that are really looking for ways to integrate that kind of talent into the enterprises, in this case in Charlotte, North Carolina. And another organization that's tremendously helpful to us, taking the children of wounded troops and helping them. The solutions to the challenges that we have are community-based. And the benefits coming out of the military are back to the community. There's been a bifurcation as we have 0.8% carrying the burden for the other 99.2. And these community-based activities are the way to bring those two groups back together. Tremendous benefit, tremendous support to private enterprise and to our communities and universities and education systems, and absolutely tremendous benefit to the troops. But I'll close with one thought. Communities shouldn't look at this as a burden. They shouldn't look at this as a responsibility. They should look at this as an opportunity. And for private enterprise, you ignore this opportunity at your own peril, because your competition will come in and capture it. And I promise you what these folks will do when they come home and get themselves into the private enterprise networks is going to be tremendous. 10 years we're going to look back now, 20 years we'll look back and say one of the things that changed American business and American entrepreneurship was this drawdown and was integrating these people back into the military. Thanks very much. We're going to bring the panel up. Thank you. We're going to bring the panel up and go right into this. I got it.
I'll just give you a mini background on who's coming up and who is coming up. Okay, well, entering the stage is one Easter Maynard. Easter is Executive Director of Child Trust Foundation, which is the foundation supported by the Golden Corral restaurants, which you may know started in North Carolina in 1971. And now I guess they're in 40 states. And Easter is an alumna of this School of Social Work in 1997, and she really has led the effort to develop Camp Corral. And that's what she's going to be talking about, which is a camp experience for the children of military members and their families who are coming back. I guess they're hoping to serve 1,800 military children across the country, and I'll let her talk about that. The other persons is Tommy Norman. Tommy is the president of Norcom, which is it's a business in Charlotte that represents investors who need assistance in developing and managing leasing, selling, and strategic planning in real estate. Tommy is also a former Green Beret, and when I first met Tommy, he became very interested in supporting military members and their families as the deployed servicemen and women start to return from Iraq and Iran, Afghanistan. And Tommy's leadership and efforts has really helped to create Charlotte Bridge Home, which is an agency that's been developed and is now operational. And speaking of Charlotte Bridge Home, our final panelist is Paul Pissarro. Paul is Program Director of Charlotte Bridge Home in Charlotte, North Carolina. Paul is a West Point graduate, completed a 22-year career in the U.S. Army. He served in combat units and is a proud Army Ranger, which is Special Forces, and a master, I didn't know this till I read your bio, a master parachutist. People who do that frighten me, but you actually don't frighten me, so that is a change for me. At any rate, we are really pleased to have these folks here. I don't know if we've come up with an arrangement who's going to start.
No,
Ladies first? I love that. Easter, you're up.
All right, great. It's good to go first. I don't want to have to follow you fellas. Good evening. My name is Easter Maynard, and I am so honored to be here tonight. It really is a great great privilege to be among these people who are really serving the military community in such an incredible way. I think Mary Beth asked me to come to kind of represent a corporate response to, you know, what's going on with our military families, and so here I am. I work for IMC, which is the parent company of Golden Corral, and Golden Corral has been working to thank the military, I would say, for about 12 years. We've had a formal program. We do a Veterans Day activity called Military Appreciation Monday, and we raise money for the DAV, and we give out free thank you meals to anyone who's ever served in the military. And last year we raised over $1 million and gave away over 375,000 meals. And we felt really great about that. We've been really proud of that program, and it's well received. But about 3 years ago, our founder was really interested in trying to figure out a way to create a charitable legacy for the company, and wanted to figure out how to do something more than just write a check. We wanted to do something that would leverage the power of all of our 490 some outlets across the country to really create more of an impact than we ever could on our own. And so we started thinking about what that could be, and that was my job, was to try and help figure out what this project was going to be. And it was an exciting but daunting task, and it took a little while. But after maybe a year and a half or so, our founder just one day said, you know, have you ever thought about a camp for kids of, folks who've been wounded in military service? And we thought, that's a brilliant idea, because it worked really well with our existing work that we were doing, and it was a way to serve children, which was something that the people in our company were really excited about. So we decided to try and create a camp, and we did. So we created a camp, and we called it Camp Corral, and we ran a pilot project in North Carolina. It was down in Ellerbe, North Carolina. I don't know if anybody knows Ellerbe, but it's near Rockingham. And we were really fortunate. We were trying to figure out how to do this camp. We run restaurants. We don't do camps. So how are we going to do this and do it well? And so we started looking, should we buy a camp? Should we partner with somebody? And we happened across 4-H. And 4-H runs Operation Military Kids Camps, which is a great program. They bring terrific expertise. They're a really trusted brand. And we thought, this might be a really terrific partnership. And so we worked with them, and they hosted our first camp down at the Millstone 4-H camp in Ellerbe. And honestly, they just made it so wonderful. They're the camping experts. They provided the hiking, the canoeing, the campfires, and all the great typical camp experiences that you think of. And so they were really an excellent partner. But we wanted it to be a value-add experience for kids. We were really thinking about, what makes it special that this group of kids comes to camp. And so we called on the School of Social Work. We called on Irene Zipper and Lori Seltz Campbell to help us do some training for our camp staff, because we wanted them to have a little bit of an idea of what it's like to work with military families and to think about the issues that the kids who are coming to our camp would be facing. These are kids who's, have a family member who's been disabled or injured or killed in action, and we really wanted them to be able to capitalize on the community that the children would be able to experience being together, and instead of being an unusual child, because of your family service. Excuse me, I get a little, anyway, you would get to be just a regular kid. You just get to have a week of fun, and you could talk about your experiences with other children who have gone through similar experiences. So we just want to give a little shout out to the school here, because it was so helpful to have them. So in the pilot year of Camp Corral, we raised money in our North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia restaurants, and we were, just testing the waters to see if this was a program that would work. Would our managers and operators like it? Would our customers like it? And we were blown away. Just in a few weeks, we raised $200,000 to send kids to camp. And so for our first summer, we were able to send 300 kids to camp. They had a wonderful, we call it a week of a lifetime. They had a great time and gave us great feedback, and other operators in our system were hearing about it. I want a Camp Corral in my state. When are you going to expand the program? So we decided to expand, and fast forward to 2012. 1 year later, we had 9 camps in 8 states this summer. We've just wrapped up our camp season. We're trying to do some analysis, but we were able to send 1,500 kids to camp this summer. We created a website. We created an online registration process, and I think really the best thing is we created a whole bunch of happy kids and happy families. We had kids from 39 states across the country that came to our camps. Every camp had a welcome team of Golden Corral employees who were so excited to get to be a part of it. They came and gave out backpacks and flashlights and journals and throwaway cameras, and just had a really wonderful, wonderful experience. We even had one family that drove their child 18 hours to participate in our camp because it was so important to them for their child to be able to be at camp with friends. Don't make that face. Jane's gonna make me cry. So I thought I would share with you one of my favorite thank you notes. I thought it was so sweet. This was from 8-year-old Cameron at camp, and he was in Ohio, and he summed it up pretty well when he said, "Thank you for helping me go to camp. This was one of my best times of my life." So we're excited about our future. We incorporated Camp Corral as a nonprofit, and we are dreaming big. We're going to add another 5 or 6 camps next summer. I just got back from Arizona visiting a camp, and we're really looking forward to building an organization that provides meaningful experiences for these children and meaningful experiences for their whole family. We are really excited because we're going to hire our first full-time staff person this fall. It's really going to be great. We think it's going to help us a lot because it's going to give us the ability to do evaluation work at a better level, and the relationship with the school is so important, for us with that, because we want to make sure that the experience is what we want it to be. We really want to impact these families in a meaningful way. So it's been more rewarding than any of us could have ever imagined. We're just thrilled with it and feel like it's just a really small way that we can try to do something helpful.
Good job.
Thank
Good
you.
job.
Did anybody hear any passion in that conversation? That is the core of what happens, I believe, when you get involved in this subject. I got started, and I can thank Kevin McDonnell for that. Where is Kevin? He's over there. He's one of the more humbled leaders in this country. I don't know how many of you saw the early stages of what was going on after 9/11 with our military. Some of you watched it closely. Some of you were all shattered like everybody else in the country. But what you did see was some of our guys go through a country that you can't even pronounce the name, and we had no equipment, but our guys got in there within the third week after 9/11, and they were riding horses on foot, but they were in there, not in uniform, but they were getting the job done. Those were Kevin's guys. They were out of Fort Campbell. He was the mastermind that made an awful lot of that happen with Colonel Mulholland. So when you start digging into his resume, you'll find an awful lot there. But one of the things you'll find about Kevin is probably one of the most passionate individuals I've ever met in my life about the care, support, and well-being of our men and women that serve this country and where their future is going to be, and is it going to be as successful as their military career. These are our best and our brightest hope, and they have been trained in many, many cases for up to 2 years, and the majority of them have gone to war, and guess what? They're coming home. And that reentry, that coming home, they get not 24 hours of training to re-enter the civilian world. They don't get a week's worth of training. They don't get a month's worth of training. They get their packet, a thank you, and they walk off the base, and they start a new life. And they're young, bright, intelligent, still got piss and vinegar all over them. They're ready to kill the world still. But it doesn't take long with all the variables that they get hit with for that world to start shifting if it isn't pulled together pretty quickly. I'm Tommy Norman. I want to tell you a little bit about what we're trying to do in our area, but I wanted to let you know about Kevin. Dig deep on him, get to know him. He's a great guy. We started about 2 years ago. Kevin was in the Pentagon at the time, and he called me about a young MARSOC Marine down here at Lejeune that had an amputated leg and was having to get out of the service and wasn't happy about it. His wife had a graduate degree. They were thinking about Charlotte, 3 children. He said, would you and Patty, my wife, be willing to kind of put your arms around him and help him see Charlotte, learn about Charlotte, and see if there's an opportunity for him? I said, absolutely, I'd be delighted to. Well, since that time, we've gotten to a point where I don't know, Paul, some 125 families later, but an awful lot of lives we've touched along the way. We have learned an incredible amount about not just the talent and capability of these fantastic human beings, but we've also learned about the gaps in the system. The gaps in the system are nobody's fault. It's probably one of the finest systems in support for veterans in the world. Probably nobody touches it, but it's overwhelmed, it's backed up, it's got all the issues that government runs into. And so from the early stages of re-entering into the civilian world, you start seeing many cases an individual starts tripping a little bit or getting confused or having difficulty getting into websites or getting frustrated with it all. And that doesn't mean that they start losing their momentum, but it does mean it's sort of an early warning, if you will, of what's to come. Well, as we got involved as a community, Charlotte, North Carolina is a non-military town. Most of you probably know that. We've got our biggest connection to the military is Fort Bragg, Camp Lejeune, and Fort Jackson. So as we got into this, we started thinking, well, how are we going to get this community rallied in support of trying to do things that maybe need some help or need pushing or need some support? And we knew there were certain allies out there. We knew the community college, the university had good systems. We knew that certainly at the governor's office, and I see John Nicholson back there, and y'all need to pat him on the back as well. We knew we had linkage into that. We certainly knew there were some employers like Siemens, AT&T, Time Warner, BOA that were doing good things in behalf of supporting veterans. We also knew that we had a fair amount of military that were now out of uniform but were in leadership positions in the community. So we got this bright idea of bringing the film Restrepo to town, and this is the one that Kevin just referred to, and we thought, well, that'd be simple enough. We'll rent out a theater and show the film and invite our closest 300 friends. Well, it not only sold out, but we had to pay for every seat in the theater twice because the theater wouldn't give it to us, wouldn't donate it. So Patty and I bought every seat in that theater for 2 shows to make sure we could control the audience. And but the net of that is we got a significant buy-in by the leadership of the community. Our mayor at the time, just prior mayor, Richard Benroot, ex-Special Forces guy, wonderful, big-hearted fella. He walked out of there and he had a tear in his eye. He said, Tommy, let's get behind this effort. We can make this thing work. But one of the nicest accolades, nearly the last guy out of the room, was a guy, a few of you know, named Hugh McCall. Hugh had put his rubber stamp on a bank called Bank of America, and still has this old DNA in him called Marine, and won't let you forget it if you give him half a chance. But as he walked out, he was solemn, and he said, Tommy, it never really occurred to me, it just didn't hit me, but tonight it hit me. These will be Charlotte's best citizens. They will be our best leaders. They will be our future. We've got to get this thing done. Now, how can we do it? What's it going to take? So suddenly, from that one film, we started having a buy-in at the community level, and it was the beginning of a real learning process for us, because the more we learned about the need, the more we reached out through the colleges, through various VA channels, and started making contact with young families that needed support. Every time we would get close to one, and Patty and I started having them move in with us for a day or 2 or 3, and every time to the letter, we felt like we were dealing with our son or our daughter, and we got so cotton picking close to them, and we've been warned about this. They become our best friends today. And I got a lot of friends, and we're lucky we got a lot of friends, but I swear I'd rather hang around with this crowd than I'd ever like to hang around with my old buddies, because this is an exciting bunch of young talent. And they're making North Carolina home, and they want to make their future, raise their children, have a great career, get their kids in the best daycare. They are the most ambitious, greatest guys in the world, but they got issues. And some of them are war-related, some of them are VA-related, some of them are where in the world are career opportunities in this messy economy. What in the world, how do I take my MOS, and it was a great MOS, and translate that to something that Siemens wants or Bank of America wants? They're not hiring anyway, but how do we make sense of all that? Well, that's becoming, and it has become, our challenge. How do we make sense of all that? So our bright idea was to get the top HR directors and close the door in one room and say, what are the best practices? How are you guys making it work? Are you hiring, and what's going on? Well, today we have 12 HR directors that meet once a month at a convenient location, close the door, and they lay it all out there. What's it take to hire a veteran, and how we going to do it better, and what are our needs? And this is Time Warner, and it's BOA, and it's Wells Fargo. It's their top guys. I'm so proud of them, but they're writing a playbook on what it's going to take to bring these kids into the system. And these kids don't like me to call them kids, but revert to that now and then. So we've gotten involved in a career initiative. We like that. But the second thing that we did that helped us, we didn't know the numbers. You know, HEPA keeps a lot of things private, so we couldn't quite tell whether we had a lot of veterans, a lot of old veterans, a lot of young veterans. We didn't know what we had, but census told us that we had 54,000 veterans in Mecklenburg County. We said, all right, that's a beginning point. How do you get to them? How do you find them? You know, they don't raise their hand. They don't respond to billboards. They basically are very private and very devoted to what they want to do in life, but they're not raising their hand. So we started networking, just trying to find what events and what activities, and we had a half dozen great cultivation events where we would have a great speaker like Smiley come, and we'd invite another 150 of our friends, and then we'd get them over there and ply them with wine and all this, and we'd have a great speech. And by the end of that speech, literally, there wasn't, in many cases, with Scotty and Tiffany, I don't think there was a dry eye in that room. But we had people say, what can I do to help? And then finally, Patty got the bright idea, well, let's ask them all for $1,000 for 3 years each and make them sign up before they get on the elevator to leave our apartment. Well, we got 100 families of our good friends, so suddenly we had some working capital. But that told us that it was out there, and so we made a commitment to ourselves: raise your money first. Don't try to shoestring this thing. Go ahead and ask the community for it. So our next big stop was the Foundation of the Carolinas. The Foundation of the Carolinas has been enormously successful. They currently manage just shy of $1 billion, huge amount of money. They said, what, you want to come talk about a need for veterans? And we said, we do. So we stretched a little bit because we still were working off hunches. We didn't have the hard facts. But we were able to talk the retired Surgeon General of the Air Force, General Jim Rodebush, who we've gotten to know through the Henry M. Jackson Foundation, and Cynthia Gilman, who runs the CP3 side, the Center for Public-Private Partnership, at the Henry Jackson Foundation, and had become friends of ours to come to town. So we did a three-way pitch in front of their boards. First time Jim Woodward and crowd had ever had a community organization come in front of them, and we hit them hard. We didn't know what we were hitting them with, but we hit them hard. But the point is, they bought it. We got a 25-zip vote in favor of supporting us financially. And then they said, all right, but we want 20,000 of that back. I said, that's not a good deal, guys. Y'all, we need every cent we got. We said, what we're going to do with that 20,000 is we're going to go out and verify the numbers. we're going to go out and get the database. We're going to go out and find out what the issues are in this community, in this region, and where the gaps are in the system and why the resources aren't connected, and help you get a playbook. So that product ended up costing $75,000 that they continue to pitch in, but as a result of that, we got this wonderful book that's got more data in it than you could ever want, but it's accurate, it's meaningful, it's credibility. It gives us the ammunition to go argue our case anywhere and everywhere. It talks about the homeless issue. Charlotte, North Carolina's got one of the worst homeless veterans issues in the country. The highest component and fastest growing component of that is the Afro-American female veteran. And you tell me why. It comes right back to career, jobs, opportunity. They're coming home, many of them have children. They need to get engaged in the community. They need to have a career. They need to have a job. They need to have income. It doesn't happen overnight. We've got to find ways to correct that. We cannot afford that. So that's one of our initial other initiatives. Work with a coalition of the homeless situation in Charlotte to get to the bottom of some of these things. But having said all that, we got to a stage where finally we said, well, we better get organized. We're kind of pushing this. We're raising money. We're doing things. We're working with families. We need to get a 501c3, which we did. That took almost a year, thanks to the IRS. But simultaneously, with Kevin's counsel and Jim Lorraine, who now has been Kevin's predecessor at the CARE Coalition, now in Augusta, they encouraged us every step of the way to keep doing what we were doing, and so see the pants, we were getting it done, and having a great time. I mean, we really were. The engagement by the community, we currently have some 1,400 families who are giving us significant funds on a very consistent basis. We've got 44 corporations who make some very nice donations to us. We raised $550,000 our first year. Our budget was about $300,000 for year one. We're on track. We're ahead of our capital. We're going to stay that way. We're going to stay liquid. But fortunately, we were able to talk our chief fundraiser into becoming our executive director, Frances Thompson, and she has helped us put all the services in some very legal, very appropriate, very good set of bylaws. We put together a great board of 15 members and told them they had to not only get involved, but we needed their engagement, and they've gotten engaged. And so we think we've done the right things on those initial fronts, but we were clearly running out of capability to deal with any more veterans because it really was volunteerism 101. So we went to the street and found the best soul that we thought we could even begin to talk into coming to Charlotte, and he wasn't even in Charlotte, wasn't even looking at Charlotte, I don't think, but we were able to get Paul Passero and his lovely wife Sandy, who are still stuck with a house in Atlanta, but they're living in Charlotte now, and to a point where they're dealing with so many situations on a daily basis that we're getting ready to have to get him some very significant additional help. But what we've decided to do is we kind of got through what we call our strategic plan. We kind of burned through it quickly. We thought we had a pretty good template and a pretty good matrix of what needed to happen in a community-driven, ground-up basis. But we've learned the system can be changed. We've learned there's an opportunity to start coming up with new ways to do things. Currently, about 50% of the veterans are enrolled in the VA. The other 50% are not. There's a way to improve that, and so we started tackling some of these issues. There's an in-state, out-of-state residency dilemma in North Carolina. We decided to step in the middle of that. We also realized that we could make some great contacts, particularly with active duty, and maybe accelerate any of these veterans that are young men and women that may be coming to Charlotte or to a community, if we could get to them while they were still on base, while they were still in active duty. And Kevin McDonnell has particularly helped us. He got us a young intern who's dealing with some health issues, but he's been a magnificent role model for an awful lot of young people in Charlotte. But we made connections with NAVSEA, that's the Navy Material Command, and their dilemma is they've got Brooke Army Hospital loaded with guys, they got Norfolk loaded, they got and these guys are coming out. They're coming out of these hospitals and going home somewhere. So many of them don't want to go to small town America. They want to go where there's opportunity, career, job, future, family. And we're not trying to recruit them to Charlotte, but we are trying to recruit them to Charlotte. If we can talk this talent into coming our way, we want every one of them. So through CP3, we've opened a lot of doors. This morning at 08:30, that's 8:30 for you civilians, Rockville, Maryland, the keynote speaker was the Surgeon General of the Navy, and 3-star, very, very passionate about this issue. About 3 minutes into his talk, he said, I want to tell you about the tail. And everybody, I mean, there's 300 people in this military medical. The tail, he said, the tail of this war, if we stop it today, if we stopped every action today, the tail of this war is so long that this country has got not only its work cut out for them and all the resources that we can throw at it, but we do not have the cognitive capability, we do not have the neurological talent, certainly we don't have the psychiatrists that this country is going to need to deal with the magnitude of these young men and women coming home. He said, I am asking you now, please get every one of your communities, find the resources, connect the dots. Let's make this thing work. It's going to take every one of us to make it successful. If we don't, and he left that hanging, if we don't is the Agent Orange of our generation. If we don't, we leave the best and brightest behind. So that's us in a nutshell. I won't talk too long, but we are a work in progress. We learn as we go. Every day we try not to trip, we try to succeed. The core of everything we do is the individual family. So I hope that will always continue. Where it all ends up, I don't know. I do believe there's a capability. We've connected with about 10 other southern cities, and we had one initial meeting. We're getting ready to go to the woods in early November and go up to Highlands, North Carolina, and talk about what we're learning, how we're doing it together, how we can share resources, ideas, playbooks, anything. And these are some at one level, some at another level, but we think that's important. It is all about connecting, and then a soul in this room right now that can't tell me or tell this panel or tell Kevin or tell Jack or tell Marianne a veteran's story. It'll probably break your heart, and that's exactly what she was talking about. So I commend you all for stepping in the line on this and listening to us tonight, and I'd like to ask Paul if he can give you a great overview of all his activity. He had a full head of hair when he started.
I did. That was awesome. This is why we decided to move to Charlotte after 25 years in Atlanta. We never anticipated leaving Atlanta. First of all, Dean, Mary Beth, awesome. Thank you for having us, and thank you for putting this together. And the passion that these two have for the military has lent a lot to us. I appreciate that. I watched Mary Beth, who was like my wife. Every time she was down in the Care Coalition, she was there for everything. She was looking just like Sandy. She'd be there taking notes from every little thing, which was impressive because I don't think she served in the military. Excuse me. Excuse my voice. I served in the military. Excuse me. I served in the military from I'm good now. In the 70s and 80s and 90s. After Vietnam, before what these kids are going through right now. I never felt myself worthy. I don't know if you can relate to this. If I see what the kids are going through now. I remember one of my assignments, which was very classified, was because of my Ranger background, was dealing with soldiers from another country who I considered elite. I watched them. I was on an aircraft with them. You know the story. If you know Ollie North, you know the story. And I'm watching these kids with names Tigre, Gato, because they couldn't tell you their names because they're families, with arms missing, legs missing, still in uniform fighting. At that point in my life, I thought, well, I don't think our Army measures up. Well, we didn't. We weren't going through what they were going through. And let me tell you, today, seeing what these guys go through today, not only do they measure up, we are way ahead, spirit-wise and nationalism, than any country I've ever seen. Now, that's the good thing. The bad thing is the people who come back are just like they're a microcosm of society. They don't know what to do. I will not give to a soldier, a veteran, a handout. They got to be treated just like you would want to treat your kids. I don't mean that in a derogatory, I mean, but there are steps for each of them. But they need some guidance, they need some direction. I don't care how old they are. Tommy mentioned 54,000 veterans. This is pre-9/11, live in Charlotte, and now we're getting all the younger ones coming back. We're dealing with two 27-year-old Marines, PTSD. Michael shakes, and the reason that gets to me is because Sandy's mom had Parkinson's and she shakes, and he's 27. They go through some things that we never went through. Imagine walking around every day with IEDs in the back of your mind, or the traumatic brain injury that Dr. Cutler is so familiar with, or PTSD. Those are terms that have been in our society for a long time, but now they're coming to the forefront because there's so much of them. What my job is to find those veterans that need the assistance because we don't identify ourselves. I never went to the VA. I went to the VA, I have had 2 knee surgeries, Achilles surgery, back injury. Well, you get that when you jump out of airplanes a lot because we're not perfect. But the reason I didn't go was because I kept seeing the guys with arm injuries, missing arms. We didn't feel worthy. My goal now is to make sure all these guys know that they are worthy. Look what they've been through. One of my friend's sons, Jay Kane, is over there now on his 8th deployment. His brother, Patrick, is on his 10th. He just got married, and his wife is there with him. But he's a ranger, so he's going in one area, she's going in another. But they're going through different things that we went through. Do they deserve any more than anybody else? Yes, because here we are. We can gather, and we can do this. So I am very passionate about that. And I think what you saw in Tommy, what you see in Kevin, what you see in Mary Beth and Jack is passion. That solves 90% of the problem. Now let's take the veterans that come into a community. We have seen some that don't even realize that they're eligible for benefits. Service-connected injury. If I ask the question to someone in here, you may consider that as, well, I was shot, I fell off a truck in training. I have one young man, well, he's not young, he's 50 right now, but he was in Honduras, working with the Honduran military, building roads, playing soccer, got a soccer ball in the eye. He never considered that a service-connected disability. So he never went to the VA. He's lost, and until I asked him a question, he said, why haven't you gone to the VA? He goes, well, I didn't. It's not service-connected. Do you see? It's an education process also. So what our job is to find the veterans who don't self-identify and try to find out what they need. Now, we find them in various ways. I was up at a school where in Charlotte, Charlotte is big for NASCAR, and there's a NASCAR Technical Institute. I went there to meet this young man. He's probably 30 years old, has all sorts of issues. And I'm up there and I'm watching people walk by who have short haircuts. Some of them had tattoos. And I said, John, are there any military veterans up here? He goes, yeah, there's a few. I just decided to walk into the administration area there. And I said who I was and who I was representing Charlotte Bridge Home. She said, wait a minute, I think someone will want to speak to you. I watched this woman, and I know she couldn't run this fast, literally run down the hall and said, Paul, I would love to meet you. We have 161 veterans here. I can't handle them. VA doesn't stop here anymore. They used to stop here, but VA has some cutbacks. They don't come here anymore. So they're out there, and all of a sudden, here's 10 or 15 walking by and said, sir, when are you coming back? We don't even know what we're really have our hands on yet until we start reaching out. So what my job is to find them and to outreach. And Luckily, we have a system in place with the community of Charlotte, North Carolina, that has the passion, the wherewithal, the leadership, that is looking to do that without any care who gets the accolades. We could care less about that. We don't want the accolades. We just want each one to be served. Now, how do y'all fit in? Social workers speak a different language. And I'm serious. I watch social workers, if I'm standing there, they talk to each other, and it's like when he leaves, we'll talk some more, which is important because the social workers can talk in a language and talk in a privacy manner and know when they're in a counseling mode or when they should be out or who they should refer the person to. I don't. So Mary Beth is going to be helping us to find the right fit for what we need to do in Charlotte now. I'm the first military person in the organization, if you will. Tommy, former military, but I'm the first military outreach person. But there are so many more that are needed, so many more communities that need what we have, because most of our communities are non-military. And every county in the country has post 9/11 vets or has OEF and OIF vets. Every county in the country has people, and that's daunting when you think about it. So one of the goals of Charlotte Bridge Home, from my perspective, is to make sure, and I don't know if you've heard it before, that there is no wrong door that a veteran could come back and enter, because we have established the linkages between ourselves and each of the nonprofits and each of the agencies, that if someone comes, they'll know at least to connect them to us. And our job is not to provide the service, but to provide the linkages to those services. Does that make sense? So I didn't want to take much time. I know we want to do a Q&A, so I'll turn it back over to Mary Beth. Let me ask this question this way. When I first got there, someone asked me to do this little radio program. It was an internet radio program, and it was based out of San Antonio. And I started talking about, am I passionate? I get passionate about this. And I'm trying not to do PowerPoint because we got this thing called Death by PowerPoint recently. I don't know if you ever heard of that. So I think Tommy's passion gets out. So we can talk about what we do. We can give you brochures, and you can take cards, and we can inundate you with that. But when I was on this radio broadcast, there were 3 other communities that called in and said, we are going to the American Legion, we're going to the VFW. How do we get a community-based organization like yours started? I said, just contact us. Because I personally know what Tommy's mentioning, our little consortium that we want to get started again. Want to get rolling again. Tommy can tell you how many are out there. And I'd rather you answer that question. Are there any other communities that you know of that are doing what we do?
I made a staggering discovery today. Sometimes the more you dig on something, kind of like the first girl that you fall in love with, and after a while you start realizing she's a pretty good gal, but there's more about her than I ever thought. Well, today I walked into an office that's not a very good parallel, is it? But at any rate, I walked into a gal's office today that had contacted me through Senator Burr's office. Her name was Stephanie Powers. She's managing director of something called the Council for Foundations, and they're in Washington, in Arlington. And I was trying to catch a plane, so we were hurrying the conversation. But I said, "What do you do?" And she said, "Well, here's what we do. We try to connect the community-based foundations in the country. We also try, on whatever the major issues are in the country, but we also try to monitor foundations, help them with legal issues or help them with accountability, but we also look for fraud." I hate to say it, but it happens. We are the kind of gatekeeper for for some of that. I said, and do you connect to other nonprofits? Do you connect to corporate foundations? And absolutely. And then she said, we kind of have our finger on about $230 billion at any one time. I said, all right, Stephanie. I said, what are you doing for veterans? Just if I can kind of cut through everything. And she said, you know, it's interesting you bring it up because some communities have asked, we've got so many different ideas that have been thrown out there. People want to do everything from bake sales to major approaches, but we think there's a real need for kind of a playbook to be put together to take to the street. And you know, there's some things, great white papers that have been done, but it's got to be an actionable, it's got to be a functionable playbook that can tie communities into their leadership and with the capital. And she said that needs to be done. Matter of fact, the VA, we're having some conversations with them. As you well know, they're the only agency that's continued to be funded with increases over the past 3 years. And they get a lot of criticism for how much money they got and whether it's being allocated right. One of the opportunities we think is these private-public partnerships, and that's what y'all are doing, and we think that's got to get expanded sooner than later. Well, the net of all that, there was a great conversation I just tripped across, and there's somebody that likewise has this same belief, likewise says, let's get this done. Not sure about how to get it done, but certainly got the wherewithal, sits in the bully pulpit, communicates with the right people every day, can pick up the phone and make things happen. Those are the tentacles that have got to happen in this country to accelerate the pace of this. And I think it's going to take, there's only one individual that can push that, and that is John Q. Citizen, the voter. You are the ones that can make these things happen, and you've got, I'll tell you one thing, Senator Burr and Senator Hagan have been magnificent. Every step of the way, they'll ask us, what can we do next? Or they'll give us an idea, and every time we go to D.C., which is very frequent these days, they want us to drop by. They want to hear the latest and greatest, what new creation. They are very proactive on this and damn determined to see if we can't change this system in this country. So that's a long way of saying a short answer. But there are resources, great resources, but I think it's incumbent on us and great talent like, you got one of the great minds sitting right back there with his finger on his lip, Errol Kudler. He's smart, he's brilliant, he can move a mountain, and he is action-oriented. And I don't know how he does the workload he does. We got to help trim that workload back so he can really focus on what can change the system and give him all the support we can get. But there's one of the best talents in the country. We got them all in this room. I see Andy Anderson back there. If they're ever a Fort Bragg, stand up, Andy. This guy is the biggest connector of people. Colonel, stand up there. This guy, if there's one guy that I know of that I'd hate to guess, he doesn't even have a black book. He certainly doesn't have a BlackBerry, but by memory, he's got more connections. If you ever need donuts in Ethiopia at 10 o'clock in the morning, Andy can get it done. It's amazing. He calls you these weird hours, but bless his soul, but my point is, we got them right here in North Carolina. We got them all around us. And we've got to get this crowd so activated that we do change the system and show this country how it can be done. And that's, when I see what we can do in Charlotte and the belief we got with the good leadership that we got there, I know we can do it in the rest of the country. And we just can't trip on a single family. And as difficult as some of them are, just when you have a difficult one, then you get an absolute out of the park one that just you can't believe how successful they're being, and you say, my God, that's my son, my daughter, that's what I want. Let's go make every one of them that way. So,
I'd like to add one thing to answer your question. Has anyone ever been in an organization where you ever heard the term away from the flagpole, where okay, let me try to, I know a military will. We were so happy when we were down in the units where the headquarters was far away because we can interact, we could learn, we can interact with the host nationals. One of the things that we're finding in the way we deal with veterans today is you've got the 50,000-foot view and you've got the pontification, and then you've got the people on the ground. And what I really feel that is so important is you're going to get studies, you're going to be overwhelmed by studies. And you get overwhelmed by, and all good intentions, don't get me wrong, and we draw from them. But unless you're down working with that veteran, unless you're down working with that person who is 55 years old and he's in the men's shelter, and you find out he's a veteran. Yes, we were talking about returning veterans and so forth, but there's that for us right now, that's the minority. There's 54 to 56,000 others that we have to reach out to too, and they're not 27 years old or 22 years old. They're older, and and they're a microcosm. Not every veteran is looking the same. In other words, you're a Vietnam veteran. Some of them are resentful to what we're doing today. Makes sense? They didn't get it when they came back. So it's different. You're not dealing with a homogeneous group just because they have the name veteran. Most of them don't even know they're veterans because they think of the American Legion and VFW as being veterans. And so, like Dr. Cutler said when I first met him, he said, well, we need to ask the question, have you ever served in the military? Because veterans, and I was the same way, veterans to me were the American Legion, the guys with the hats on. The World War II. I don't mean it negatively. I mean those are veterans to me. So when we hear the issue of veterans, some of the guys don't even realize that's them. You know, they've been in 5 or 6 years. That's not me. Well, I asked this one guy recently, says, "Oh, do you consider yourself a veteran?" He goes, "No, I got out after 6 years." Lifer veteran. See, it's different. So education, educating the nonprofits and the agencies around us on how to, Privacy Act is huge, HIPAA is huge. We just can't go get names from people, otherwise the problem will be solved. But we have to find who they are. And once we find them, I can guarantee you they're so thankful that there's someone who's looking out to just answer their questions. It's huge. And in the communities right now, what we're finding is it has to, this is my personal opinion now, you can have all the passion and all the grassroots desire to start a organization, a community-based organization, but if you don't have the correct leadership and have the ability to raise the funds and have the community buy-in, have some influential person in the community to do this who has a passion for this and whose heart is like, I'm propping up my boss here, but Tommy, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. So you need to have the right thing. And I advise anybody, if they ever want to talk to him on how he did it, because it's not the textbook, but just the way it was done in Charlotte. And I think it was a good way to do it.
Major Paul, would you stand up? I want y'all to look at our true American hero. I want every one of y'all to look at this lady. There are those people that do things in the world, and some of you call them angels, some of you just call them motivators, some of you call heroes, some of you call them, gosh, she's pretty good at what she does. But this gal has rewritten the book on how to make and be an advocate for young men and women that are coming out of the service, and particularly the wounded ones. She can move a mountain. And you know, you hear about the firewall between the military and the civilian. There's no firewall here. That lady, as attractive as she is, she got 2 children, got a husband that's in the service. She's at Leavenworth right now. She could run for president, and I'd do everything I could to raise her $100 million.
Go to school in Leavenworth.
Get to know her. She'll be a lifetime friend.
And she's a social worker. I think we're out of time. What I would urge you to do is we have lots of materials back here with the contact information of our speakers. And please, I know that they are willing to answer phone calls and emails, so please connect with them. And thank you all so much for being here.